My name's Mark Sweeney, and I'm a professor in the Department of Sustainability and Environment at the University of South Dakota.
And we are talking today because you have, I think it was, when did you get the word that your proposal, that you were being awarded funding for your proposal?
It was mid-December that we got first word, and then officially uh, the late or it was early part of January, we got the official
S-
approval.
So a bit of a holiday time thing. Did it uplift your spirits for the holidays?
Yeah, it certainly did. Yes, it certainly uplifted my spirits at the end of the fall semester.
That could be a time of a lot of work has gone in to planning and teaching and working with students and getting there. Let's talk a little bit about the award. So I'll read the name of the project here, which is a big. I don't see a fancy acronym, so maybe you have one of those too. But the award is Collaborative Research Assessing Current and Future Dust Flux from the Northern Great Plains, U.S., with extreme climate variability and insights from the 1930s Dust Bowl drought.
Yeah,
And do you have a fancy acronym you've come up for?
not yet.
A friend of mine a while ago, it was years ago, we joked that we could have a consulting firm where we would help scientists come up with clever acronyms. Maybe there's still room for us to do that. So
Yeah, well, it's a mouthful, and it'd be easier to say, like dust squared, which is very nice.
it is. They've come up with a way to put it all together. So the Dust Bowl is something we learn about in school. Has the understanding of what that was, the impact of that faded over time?
Um, I with Ken Burns's PBS documentary on the Dust Bowl recently, I think it comes around in phases, and the key thing here, I think, is that I don't think it's faded so much in the southern plains, like in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, and so on. But in the northern plains where I'm located, there's a general awareness, but nothing in terms of like what happened down in the southern plains. And I think that's a problem because the Dust Bowl affected the northern plains about as severely as it did in the southern plains, but the southern plains got all the attention.
And so not quite an untold history, but maybe a history that warrants some paying attention to, especially as we're facing further disturbances like this into the future.
That's right. And this was in part inspired by a big dust storm that blew through here in May of 2022. We had drought conditions. I've been here in Vermillion, South Dakota since 2006, and I hadn't seen anything like that. Now, I haven't lived in this area for a long time. I mean, that's kind of a long time, but um, dust storms really aren't a common thing up here like they are in the southern plains even today. And it was one of those large walls of dust that were very reminiscent of the photos that you see of black blizzards and such from the 1930s. And so, that really kind of struck home that this could potentially occur today and it could potentially occur in the future with the warming climate.
I've seen several satellite pictures and videos and things of dust events in places that we more associate with really arid climates, like the Middle East or some of the more desert-heavy landscapes. Is that something you think the Americans are going to see more of, like yourself, and become more common in the United States?
Well, in the southwest part, with potential increases in aridity and drought, I think this is a possibility. And what I don't think people are thinking about at all are potential increases in dust storm activity in the northern plains. And so that's what this is meant to bring awareness to, because I think that is a potential reality. Should we get prolonged drought up here in this part of the country, even with modern day farming practices, dust storms are very likely to happen. And they occur on kind of a smaller scale up here, from fields that have been tilled recently. Um, and are left bare, and a big windstorm comes by, and you can get dust storms. But the big walls of dust have been really rare since the 1930s.
Sounds like decision makers, policy makers, community members, people like that, you want to be aware that you should be paying attention to this. You should think about this as you're coming with management plans or
Yep.
new regulatory prospects.
Farmers too, yeah, would, they're the ones that would suffer probably the most, economically and potentially socially and health wise from something like that.
As you were getting your proposal together, did you find more dust events than you thought you were going to find to say we should be studying this? We're like, oh my gosh, there's a little bit more going on than I thought happening around here.
Yeah, so I'd worked on a project with a colleague, Steve Foreman, down at Baylor University, where we were looking at the sources of potential sources of dust and meteorological triggers to the 1930s Dust Bowl in the Southern Plains. And to kind of wrap up that research, we both talked about Dust Bowl in the Northern Plains, and a master's student that I helped co-advise came up here to South Dakota for her thesis and looked at state archives of climate data, including dust days, wind events, and that kind of thing. And she, in the 1930s, she cataloged over 700 individual dust events in South Dakota alone. And there's another book, I can't recall its name right now, but a similar analysis was done up in North Dakota a couple of decades ago, and I think they documented 900 storms. And so what we want to do is utilize the state archives in the Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska, to see what the influence of dust was like in the 1930s, to get a better handle on that and be able to compare it to the Southern Plains. So we've got a little bit of prelim data here in South Dakota, but we want to expand it to the larger Northern Plains region.
For someone who may not have experienced a dust event and the serious nature of it, it's not just going out and then brushing off your car like you're brushing off a light snow. Talk a little about what the threats are to people's health, to their landscapes, their yards, their farms.
Yeah, the impacts are endless. So the erosion of topsoil with some of these larger events are pretty detrimental to the overall fertility of soil for growing crops, because you're basically blowing away the nutrients plants require to grow. And so that soil gets picked up and moved from one place to the next. So you not only impacted the quality of the soil of the land that you're farming, but then in many cases you've got drifts of soil piling up around fences and barns and houses, and you have to deal with that. And then, of course, there's the classic stories during the Dust Bowl of people using towels to put around the edges of the windowsills and the doors to limit the amount of dust that came in, and they had to store cups and bowls upside down, and every day they were dealing with thin layers of dust in their houses that they had to clean up on a continuous basis. And then the people are inhaling this dust that causes all kinds of respiratory impacts, and they have things that called dust pneumonia, and they're still trying to work out, like what the true health impacts of the Dust Bowl were back then, because there weren't as clear relationships between the inhalation of dust and health. But we know better now that there's a strong relationship between poor air quality and bad health. Then you've got the visibility problems. People were getting lost, just walking from place to place in the 1930s because they couldn't see, and it looked like the sun had set. It was so dark out. And then there's this bizarre phenomenon of electrification and dust storms that would, cause cars to stop in their tracks and other things to stop working just due to the charged particles in the atmosphere. So there were a lot of different effects of the large dust storms back then that we could potentially see again in the future.
The electrification, that just is quite startling and concerning to think about what that could be for like large government-run servers that are doing, important, financial work or that are keeping the power on in, communities and things like that. So there's lots of, that's kind of scary to think about.
Yeah, and I don't know, there's been some work done on that, and then I know that like dust isn't very compatible with a lot of circuitry and whatnot, but that's probably an area that could use some more research for sure.
Dust is not compatible. That's a very sciencey way to describe some of
Yeah.
these. The project proposal describes a way you're going to be collecting some of this data, which is fascinating. It says you're going to create a big wind tunnel and use the wind tunnel to study some of these things. What's that going to be? What's going to be like? Do you already know where you're going to do this, or what's that going to be like?
Yeah, so it's not so big. So the instrument I'm going to use is called the Portable In Situ Wind Erosion Lab, and it's a small miniature wind erosion device. And I helped field test that all the way back when I was doing my postdoc, and I use it on a lot of my research today. And you set it on the ground, and there's a blade in there that spins at different RPMs that causes a shear on the surface, much like when the wind blows across the soil, it shears the soil surfaces and helps get the dust and sand particles wafted into the air. So it's a way of simulating winds, basically. So we don't have to wait for the wind to happen. We can just make it happen. And so you can sit it on any type of soil that you like. And then there's sensors on there that measure the concentration of dust that are emitted with these different tests. So what we want to do is see how much dust we can produce off of a wide variety of soil types that exist up here in the Northern Plains, focusing specifically on some of the counties that were most severely impacted during the 1930s. So we want to use the 1930s as kind of a way to inform where we might see the worst impacts in the future.
Is it going to time out where you'll be doing like 100 years ago in this area, they had this experience, and now we're finding out more information? Will it take that long for the project to run, or are there going to be a sequel so you could be doing this in the 2030s?
Well, I don't know. I think this is the first good run at it just to see the potential for how emissive these soils are, or what the processes are up here that produce dust. And I already have a notion that they're a little bit different up here compared to the Southern Plains. And then bringing in Derek Molly's modeling, how does that relate to the bigger picture in terms of large dust storms over the region and air quality impacts that we might see? So, once we get this baseline information and this first run at what we might have to look at, then maybe, follow-up studies will be warranted.
I want to ask about Derek again in just a second, but one of the things, as you were describing how you're going to operate the equipment, like is it a remote control, like an Xbox game controller, where you can just dial that thumb thing and make the wind go faster and faster and faster, and then, oh, that's too fast.
That sounds fun, but actually, so there's a touchscreen computer that's connected to it, and we have pre-programmed tests based on how quickly we want the blade under the pie swirl to spin. And we know what the approximate wind speeds are related to the RPMs. So it's pre-programmed, and so not quite as exciting as I have a Bluetooth keyboard, so that's fun.
Just little sliders. You could just a little bit. Well, it sounds like much more of a controlled experiment than just like what you're feeling on the day, and perhaps letting out some stress and frustration with the small wind tunnel. Is this just an excuse to use this equipment again?
Yes, like I said, I've been using it a long time, and it's kind of my bread and butter in a manner of speaking. But yeah, it provides a whole lot of information that would be more difficult to obtain if you used an actual traditional large-scale field wind tunnel, which requires you know, numbers of people, 5, 6 people, covers a larger area where this is more portable and easier to collect data with.
How did you find out about Derek? Or have you been friends for a while? Did you just read some paper of
No,
his?
so that's the great thing about the Critical Zone Dust project that you've been working on with Jeff Monroe. So Jeff got me involved with this project back when they were submitting the proposal, and he paired me up with Kevin Perry. And so I've been working with him and his students on some of the dust issues in the areas where the Great Salt Lake has been drying up. And of course, Derek is involved with this project also. And we just met through this large collaborative research that's going on. And one of the critical aspects of this Dust Bowl work that's new for this proposal compared to the work that I've done in the Southern Plains with my colleague from Baylor is the dust modeling component. And I thought to myself, well, who do I know that could potentially do this kind of thing? And there are a lot of dust modelers kind of around the world, but I didn't know any of them particularly well. And I liked the idea that Derek was already working on a dust project. And then the whole idea of these collaborative proposals is to build new collaborations, right? But one, obviously the main thing is to work on the science that you proposed, but what the National Science Foundation ultimately wants out of this is new collaborations coming out of this and work on new projects. And so I reached out to Derek and said, would you be interested in being involved with this? And he said yes right away. And so that's how we got to this point.
Last question for you, and thank you for taking some time today to talk
Yeah,
about this,
certainly.
is how do you resist starting now? I think your funding, according to the award, begins later on in the year. But
Yeah.
how do you like resist getting started, or are you already sort of started and just doing it on the side already?
Yeah, well, I think Derek told me he's already started working on the side. And so for me, a lot of this work will be done by the graduate students that we're recruiting to help do the work. So the official start date is June 1st. And right now we are working to recruit students, have them apply to the program and get them here so that they're ready to go in the fall. Maybe in the summer if they could get here earlier, but definitely in the fall. And then, so I've got, it's on the back burner, as it were. I'm thinking about it. I'm doing reading. I'm trying to get my ducks in a row so that we can get started right away. But, as with a lot of other researchers, I have other projects going on. And so right now I'm thinking about, I'm going to get really busy come June. I need to try and get as much done on these other projects as I can to try and tie up some loose ends there. So it's on my mind definitely. But I think we'll, at least on this side, we'll wait and hit some of the major, start for the research once we get the students. And so after June sometime.
Makes me think of one more question. Is this the favorite project that you've ever done so far, or is always the next one the favorite one?
Well, as my career chugs along, some of these projects, these new projects are quite exciting. And I'll give credit to my colleague down at Baylor, Steve Foreman. He got me on board with the Southern Dust Bowl one. And so he got me really interested in this problem and made me realize that I could contribute something to this using the pie swirl, the little wind erosion device. And I study these things in general anyway, but I do have to say that, yeah, this is one of the more exciting things because we already knew a lot about the Southern Dust Bowl. And so we did research and came up with some new ideas about it, and that's cool and all. But I feel like we're breaking ground here in the Northern Plains, and that is very exciting.